So let's start with the big disconnect. The warnings from scientists are getting more and more urgent, like the UN panel that we just heard from. At the same time that the prospects of national action, at least in the US, are getting more and more remote. I mean, not only with the decisions of this administration, but with now the creation of a 5-member Supreme Court majority that may be very hostile to federal regulation going forward. So given that disconnect, I think the first question many people are asking is how much can be done to deal with climate challenges below the national level, at the state level and even the local level. So let me start by asking each of you. Lauren, I mean, this is what you spend your days. How much can cities, states, private sector do in the absence of a national commitment?
Well, look, first of all, thank you so much for having me, and thank you to the Atlantic for hosting this fantastic summit today. And you know, I came to work for Mayor Garcetti because I truly believe that that is where we can have the key impact on climate change. And you know, I'm a native Angelina. I grew up just a few minutes away from here, in fact, and that was not the perception that I had growing up. Mm-hmm. And it is so exciting to see how that has changed. And in fact, when you think about a city like Los Angeles, the second largest city in the country, the largest city in California, we are so blessed with the opportunities where cities pull the levers on everything from planning to building codes. We have a huge responsibility in Los Angeles because we own and operate our own municipal electric and water utility. That is a very huge opportunity to make such a difference when it comes to sustainability and greenhouse gas emissions. The largest municipal utility in the country. But we also own and operate the Port of Los Angeles, and we own and operate the airport. Those are municipal proprietary departments. And so again, great opportunity and a huge responsibility.
Yeah. Michelle?
I would echo everything that Laura says. Not only can we do a lot on the local level, but we already are. And as forward-thinking and as much as our local government leaders are doing, luckily we don't have to rely on them alone, really. It's all about convening partnership and really bringing together a number of actors in this space so that we can bring together our local government officials, utilities, regulators, companies, and the public at large to really move forward. And that's a lot of what we're doing at Lacey.
And let me be the voice of Scott. Can it get to scale?
Yes.
When you look at the divisions within the states, can it get to the scale that we need if we're relying on actors below the national level?
So that's the leading question of exactly where I was going to go. I worked in cities for over 20 years. I'm a fervent believer in cities and the power of leadership and the actions that they've been taking on climate change. I think cities really push the boundaries and push the ceiling on where we can go, but the federal government is absolutely critical on raising the floor. And that's what you're seeing, the CAFE standards. If you freeze those in 2020, it's going to be very hard for us to meet any of the Paris Agreement, any of the greenhouse gas reductions needed to stave off devastating issues. When you look at the Clean Power Plan and the EPA's role in trying to protect air pollution, cities and states can do quite a lot. We need the federal government to be taking action and making sure that the laggards have to raise up.
And your view, and thinking also about the private sector in terms of design and the way the built environment is created, how much can be done without a national commitment?
I actually think that's where all the most innovative work is happening, is in the private sector and at the local level, especially here in Los Angeles, where people's expectations are that we're just still the sort of car capital of the world. We're the place that can show that even the expectations from the car capital are to overcome that and be a model for places like Oregon and Washington and the other states that think of themselves as more green than we are.
Yeah. So let's talk a little about, and we've all said, you know, maybe varying views about how much progress subnational actors can make, but an understanding that they can. So let me ask you this. What are the most powerful points of leverage? And this is something that you look at all the time. Where can cities make the biggest dent in changing the trajectory of carbon emissions?
So if we look at our options and we look at where we need to make deep, deep cuts in carbon emissions, we know that it's essentially, and if you hear the mayor talk about this, it's where we live and how we house ourselves, both in buildings by day and commercial and at home, and how we get around and our goods get around. And so when we look at our opportunities, it's absolutely in the building stock, and you know, we are already working on some of the most stringent building codes and opportunities to get more efficient appliances, more efficient building envelope, and really push the envelope when it comes to now moving off of carbon altogether. And so that's something that we do through our municipal utility, not just moving off of coal, but moving off of carbon.
The state has set the goal of by 2045, carbon-free electrical power. Is that achievable for Los Angeles?
It absolutely is, and in fact, we started to study how to do that before SB 100 was passed. So it's very exciting to see that the whole state is coming with us, but we're well down a path to figure out how to get there. We already know that everyone across the state continues to beat every renewable energy target that the state has ever set. So we're not too concerned about that. But then what we have to do is, as we get more renewable, we're plugging in everything. And if we're plugging our cars and our trucks into the grid, we're plugging into the sun, we're plugging into the wind, and that's where our focus is.
And just to follow up one more question, in terms of getting to a zero carbon electrical grid in LA, is the key to switch to renewable sources or to reduce consumption?
It's both.
It's both.
It's absolutely both. We have to have zero carbon generation resources. It isn't all about generation. It is about how electricity moves and how we interact with the grid. So it doesn't all have to come from really far away. We can store it. We can have on-site renewables. There's so many different options. But yes, we have to reduce our consumption.
Yeah, Michelle, as soon as you said plug in, I felt it was
I knew
coming.
she'd take it over.
It was coming your way. Talk in your view about what is the greatest point of leverage that a city can act on.
Yeah, my eyes light up when you mention transportation, really, because the single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution in California is our transportation sector, and the emissions from the transportation sector are on the rise.
4 years in a row, right?
Exactly. And so it's really a key area in which we need to work, and the good news is there is a lot of momentum in this space. We have worked to create a partnership with Mayor Garcetti's office, a number of regulators, corporate partners in this space and others to really set the ambition level high, to say that by 2028, when the world turns its attention on Los Angeles for the Olympic Games, that we're going to be able to move people and goods throughout this region without adding to and creating more emissions.
So that 2028 zero emission roadmap that you're organizing, explain a little about what the goals are and what do you think will have to happen to get us, because it's pretty ambitious.
It is ambitious. So the leadership partners have come together and said, we're doing a lot of great work already here in California to move the needle on climate change, but we really need to do more. We need to escalate ambition, and we're committing collectively to further reduce greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution an additional 25% beyond what's already in existence, and to do that over the next 10 years by electrifying transportation. That is a big goal. And so there's a lot that has to happen, both in terms of the movement of people and goods throughout our region.
Dana, I mean, you specialize in design and architecture, and I think you brought a couple slides to talk about kind of some of the options that may be available going forward. You want to see if we can call those up? Go ahead.
Well, at my research center at UCLA, the other cityLAB, we've been working on what, as architects and urbanists, we think of as being the principal contributor to reducing greenhouse gases, and that's really to reduce sprawl. So what you're looking at now is the backyard homes, or ADUs, granny flats model that we built to kind of intrigue people's imagination about how inventive this could be. And then we co-wrote the state law, which is now in effect and has opened 8 million backyards for additional housing, small affordable housing, basically on free land. So I feel like that's a kind of model it represents our next goal. Our last one was to double the density of Los Angeles. Now it's to make this the moment of peak auto. And if you look at the next slide, so this was a project that we did in Arizona, another place with a kind of sprawling landscape to turn all their mini malls into actually green oases that would have a kind of algae farm economy, make a cool way station for people, and to convert the gas station sort of and parking lot ecology into one that's more oriented towards people, with the main idea being that really we should be housing people better than cars. And I think all of us are working on that same goal in different ways.
Adam, Michelle noted something, and it's obviously an acute problem in California, but California is not unique, which is that emissions from transportation are rising again, even as emissions from electrical generation have been steadily declining. And I'm interested in your thoughts about why you think that's happening, And is it possible to reverse that? And I would add one other, the next 10, which is a think tank in San Francisco, points out that in 4 of the 5 largest California cities, public transportation usage is going down, which is obviously the wrong direction if you're trying to reduce emissions from transportation. What's happening?
So I actually think, and I feel like Dan was reading my notes as I was thinking about what are the leverage points that cities can play. First and foremost, density. And that is critically important, and that's zoning, and that's building codes, and that's what power cities have, because that really influences transportation. It ties into housing and affordability, critical issues, and it allows people to have other transportation options. I think that's another area where cities are beginning to do a lot more in. The fastest growing bike network in the country right now is in the Motor City. Detroit is moving away from cars and really investing in it, and I think cities can play a role in giving transportation options. There is an unintended consequence that can sometimes comes with technological innovations. New York, we're seeing a rise in Uber, Lyft, and ride sharing, and a decrease in mass transit, because when it's affordable enough, people will take a single car. If we're not investing in mass transit and service is unreliable, people will shift to other modes of transportation. I think that's dangerous. I think the urban form is critically important for cities for a leverage point as well to address climate impacts. I'm thrilled that the rooftops behind us are all white to help combat the urban heat island effect. And as Lauren was saying, building efficiency is important as well, where cities can really leverage that. And I think that all of these issues, as we think about it, and where cities have a unique lens, is how they interplay with equity and affordability and the types of cities we want to live in, not just from a climate perspective, but from an affordability and social perspective.
I mean, people have been talking about density in California for years and promoting more density. On the other hand, the affordability challenge is compelling people to move further away from where they work in many cases, which is increasing how much they drive every day, and vehicle miles traveled are also going up. How would you describe where LA is in finding a better way to situate people near to where they work and play?
So when we think about our sustainability and our climate goals, the idea of housing and development are part and parcel, are completely integrated. If you look at our sustainable city plan, it actually directly integrates housing and development, transit and mobility, equity. All of these things equal sustainability. They equal high quality of life, and they equal reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So for us, when I'm not just working with kind of the more traditional counterparts that you would think in sort of energy and environmental issues, but I'm working with our housing department, with our planning department, with our building and safety department, and of course, transportation, to look at how we combine all of these goals together. But it does require a lot of collaboration at the state level as well. And so we look at, how can Sacramento help cities with funding and with other opportunities to really get that housing stock moving.
Yeah, and is density, but I guess I should ask Dana, you've used the phrase a 21st century neighborhood, right? People should be residents of a 21st century neighborhood. What do you mean by that? And is it something different than the way development is now proceeding?
Yeah, I think it is different. And I think it should be something that we look forward to as improving our quality of life, not just densifying it. So I'm looking forward to when we get to YIMBY, not YIMYY, which is an improvement over NIMBY.
Yes.
Not in my backyard, yes in your backyard. Now it should be yes in my backyard. And when we get to that level, it'll be when we live near transit, when we actually have more amenities, when we can walk places, when we can pick up a bike, and we don't have to get in our cars to head into that congestion. And I actually think Los Angeles is the kind of place where we can move into that sort of neighborhood. So now, for instance, we're looking at trying to take all those spaces that are sort of possible for reclamation, parking lots in front of grocery stores. You could still have parking, but you could build housing on top. And we could have affordable housing next to less affordable housing near high-density housing. So it would really be a range of options, which now we don't have. And there are pockets of this occurring. Actually, we're sitting in one, in a way, right? The W Hotel is at the heart of a transit center where we have higher density living nearby. People do walk here. So there are models. UCLA is another where everyone's a pedestrian. It costs a fortune to park, thanks to our parking guru, Donald Shoup, who says we shouldn't provide any more parking. And that would be one of the solutions.
Michelle, Lauren mentioned the ports before, and which kind of goes, and Dana mentioned the public transportation, both of which are different aspects of the zero emission challenge. The ports, a lot of heavy trucks coming in and out of the ports. Obviously, the public transportation fleets are. Talk about how does the challenge, excuse me, how does the challenge of moving those sectors toward greater electrification compare to the private consumer in their car?
It's an absolutely critical challenge to be tackling, and what I'm excited about is that we're actually working together with both the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach right now to solicit information from those who are involved in the trucking world to understand both the state of zero-emission trucking and then looking out, even in the near term, 3 years, what are they anticipating in terms of their opportunities and challenges, and thinking through together how we at LACY, working with the ports and working with the California Air Resources Board, can sort of set this stage and provide funding and opportunities for pilots so that those heavy-duty, long-haul trucks, the medium-duty delivery trucks, are moving more and more rapidly towards an electrified future. In some cases, they are, in terms of the medium-duty electric trucks. I'm sure we've all seen the Frito-Lay trucks around, other companies that have already begun to make that transition. On the long-haul truck side, I think that's still in the works right now, but there's a lot of companies that are putting emphasis on that.
So let me ask you, one success clearly that LA has had is in water consumption, right? 20% reduction in per capita water consumption over the last few years, and a social change as well as policy change. I mean, people felt guilty watering their lawns and kind of felt, would get approbation from their neighbors. What are the lessons from that? And is that at all applicable to some of the other challenges in building? People don't feel guilty about having a 7,000 square foot house, and they don't feel guilty about driving a big SUV. They did feel guilty about being seen as watering their lawn. So what happened there, and is it applicable anywhere else?
I think that it is, and it's a great example and lesson learned. I mean, we were in, and we are, and we will remain in a water crisis. And so what has been so important is to see that even when Governor Brown declared the drought over, in LA, we were really concerned about seeing a rebound in water consumption. And we've seen a small amount, but we've actually seen that the system is hardened, and that people's behavior has become more hardened toward conservation. And so conservation on water is really the way of life.
Yeah.
And so when we look at some of our other options, I beg to differ. I think, and maybe it's just because people know my profession, but people do apologize to me when they say, oh, I didn't get an EV for my, I just got, but I'm gonna go plug in, and I do think that sort of human behavior and an understanding about the evolution of technology and the availability is changing people's decisions around things like vehicles. I know a lot of people who have moved to Los Angeles in the last few years and said, do you think I can do it without a car? I'm gonna try to do it without a car. And a lot of them have been able to thus far. And when they do, they wanna get an EV. And so I think that we're seeing that in transportation. I think we'll be able to see that in other places as well.
Yeah, and you work with a lot of different cities, and we have, through various Atlantic events, been in a lot of different cities over the last couple of years. I've probably interviewed a dozen mayors in different cities, and every single one of them, to one degree or another, talks about the equity challenge, where the cities are growing again, adding jobs, adding people, in many cases for the first time in decades, and yet they can't put their own kids from low-income neighborhoods on a pathway to compete for the jobs they are creating. And in fact, many of those families are finding themselves not only excluded from those opportunities, but displaced by them, by people who come in. So if we're talking about more density, and as a key part of the solution to reducing kind of the footprint of cities, where does equity fit in? How does equity fit in?
I believe you're going to be in Detroit next week interviewing the mayor there to talk about this issue in economic mobility. Equity has to be at the heart of the issue and has to be an intentional planning process. It can't be something you come up with a plan and then add it on at the end. I think Mayor Garcetti and the sustainability plan in LA gets a lot of credit for doing that. And it talks about the metrics you measure matter, and what you're valuing is going to determine what actions you're investing in. And I think that's been a real focus of intentionality for cities, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, New York with their sustainability plan, where they're designed differently to think about growth in a very different way and to have different ways of measuring that success. And if you don't do that, you're going to end up with different outcomes.
Yeah, EV is certainly a classic example, and where people say, okay, great, there are a lot of upper middle class people who have Teslas, but as long as it's a $90,000 project, it's not going to replace the Chevy Malibu.
Well, I think it's what Adam said, that we need to be intentional about our policies and our programs, right? So if you look at LA, there's a number of different innovations that are really working in this space, everything from the Blue LA electric vehicle car sharing program that is specifically being piloted in low-income communities to work that we are starting at Lacey together with the City of Long Beach to really think through last mile solutions for disadvantaged communities, whether that be scooters, whether that be electric car sharing. There's a lot of exciting potential, but it's really about being intentional as we work forward.
I want to bring in the audience, but did you want anything about how equity, if you're talking about density and sustainability, how you build in equity?
Well, just to echo what's been said, I mean, gentrification is really the issue in Los Angeles now because people are moving back downtown.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we don't have good answers for it yet, but one of them is to value staying in place and to slow the machinery of gentrification so that people have choices and to make more choices in all the neighborhoods we have, which means we have to accept all the affordable housing solutions we can in our own neighborhoods so that that doesn't happen.
All right, let's go to the audience.
Is this mic on?
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me? I'm Andrew. I design indoor vertical farms, greenhouses, urban farms. My question for you all is, how do you think urban agriculture can be part of a layer of the food and smart city of the future? Thank you.
Good question.
So thank you for the question. You know, we talk about urban agriculture specifically in the Sustainable City Plan. We talk about it from a healthy food access standpoint. We talk about it from an equity standpoint and also from a resilience standpoint. In general, being able to build out more green space and spaces for people to gather are really important from that equity standpoint as well. So we're really excited to build out some of our urban agricultural systems. Right now, we are in the process of refreshing the Sustainable City Plan, and it has been so exciting and encouraging to see how much food, local food access, and healthy food access specifically has been such a key recurring theme that we're hearing from Angelenos. So we're really excited to develop out, and if you have ideas, to develop out specific targets and programs to incentivize and encourage all of those things, including specific local agriculture.
Another question over here.
Hi, my name is Ed Barris. I'm with UCLA's Technology Development Group. You touched briefly on behavioral incentives and changes. Have you seen any other work in that area that's novel, that's changing the way people think? For instance, my utility, Pasadena Water and Power, sends a little quarterly statement showing me how I rate compared to my neighbors. And those are things that I have to do on a daily basis, just like saving water. But it seems as though, for instance, I heard that if every car in the United States had its tires at the proper air inflation pressure, we'd save as much oil as exists in Anwar in 1 year.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of ways. O-Power is a great company that had been working to try to gamify and shame, but also incentivize people to think about the energy use differently. And I think that the incentives that we deliver, you know, if your employer gives you a monthly parking pass and you pay for it all at once, you're incentivized then to drive every day because it's already paid for, as opposed to charging you for every day you drive in. That's a way of incentivizing and getting behavioral change in a very different way that I think we need to rethink how we interact with the different uses that we have within our cities.
Let's bring in one more.
Hi, my name's Marlene. My question is about affordable housing. I know that Scott Wiener had a bill that failed, and you know, there's been a lot of issues locally to sort of address the issue, to have high density, you know, urban density. And so how would you address that? Because I know that, you know, EIRs and there's a lot of like, there's a lot of issues as far as like building more housing. So how would you address that?
Well, I think Scott Wiener and Richard Bloom have been real leaders on this, and we have to thank them for putting these bills in front of us. That one was a little bit radical, which was going to up the density at every bus stop, but it's again, you put something out which opens possibilities for something maybe slightly more moderate. And the climate in Sacramento right now is totally with you, which is we need more housing. And I actually think one of the things that's great is that by going to the state, it sometimes gives us directives back at the local level where it may be a single voice that stands in the way of more affordability. That single voice of someone who's really anti-density is slightly quieted by a top-down approach, which is counterintuitive in a way.
Can I ask real quick before I let you go? Where do you think national action is most necessary to help cities reach their goal? What would be, I think, Adam, you think transportation, cafe? I mean, just where do each of you think that we most need a national movement?
So for me, it's on the cafe standards, and I also think on energy, and that comes from the state and regional level. I also think we have a fundamental misalignment in transportation funding, and that's where the federal government can be very powerful on getting more money to mass transit and the infrastructure investments needed.
I mean, I would agree. When we look at what it is we can do on our own, the potential undermining effect of the loss of the cafe standards will have a ripple effect even in LA. No matter what we do, it will affect the market. Even though we are doing everything we can to send those very clear signals to the market that that's not what we want, despite what you may hear, and we're working with cities around the country, over 400 cities, to tell the federal government that's not what we want, and tell the vehicle market that whatever you hear in Washington, we are still buying electric vehicles, and we want you to make them for all use cases. And so that's something that we're trying to use to counterbalance that. But I would agree, cafe standards and infrastructure support, particularly in the transportation sector, has been a huge area.
All right, let me pull the plug there. Join me in thanking this terrific panel.